Hey, folks, welcome back to the Taylor Tax Show, the podcast that helps highly paid, highly taxed, high profile, high net worth, and ultra high net worth taxpayers save a bunch on taxes, legally and perennially. I'm Terrence Taylor, the co founder of Taylor Tax, and I'm an enrolled agent. And this is my partner, Big Al Donnell Jr. Say what's up, Big Al.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Big Al, and I love my mama.
Hi. And Big Al is also an enrolled agent. And today we're sharing with you episode 21, which we're titling Michael Jackson and Taxes, or Tax Lessons from Michael Jackson's Estate. Now, you may reasonably wonder if Michael passed in 2009, may so rest in perfect peace, why are these guys talking about Michael Jackson 15 years later? Well, folks, in the news, we were shocked to see that Michael's mom and one of his son, who used to be known as Blanket but now goes by Bigi, so I think that would be pronounced Biggie, are in court about some fees for lawyers that she once paid, and he's opposing it, and it's all around the valuation of the estate and a potential sale of the assets of the estate. So we dug into this and we learned some pretty amazing lessons that we want to share with you. So we'll take you through just the high level stuff about the estate. We'll take you through the lessons that we learned, and then more importantly, we'll take you through the tax lessons that you can learn and you can benefit from. And I just want to be very clear up front that we're doing this as information sharing. We're not estate planning attorneys, so we're not giving you estate planning advice. We are qualified tax professionals, and yet and still, if you want to act on anything we share from the tax angle, you should consult with a qualified tax professional. And of course, you can consult with us. All right, Big Al, that was a long intro. Let me hand over to you to kick us off by sharing a little bit about Michael Jackson's estate.
Of course, thanks, and thanks for that disclaimer as well, my friend. So here's the thing: is that just like most of us, or not most of us, let's just say like many of us, we've set up a state. Michael Jackson had a trust, I should say, called the Michael Jackson Family Trust. Now, in that trust, he stated that he had three minor children at the time, and that his mom, Catherine, would be the legal guardian of these children. Now, inside this estate was supposed to be, or inside of the trust was supposed to be his entire estate, all of his assets. All right. Now, from one article that I read, the breakdown was that 40% of his estate would go to his mom, 40% of the estate would go, or 40% of the estate inside the trust would go to the children, and 20% to charity. Now, this is, of course, after all expenses are paid, legal fees, expenses, debts, and other obligations. All right. So now, with that being said, we're looking at a trust valued at around $2 billion. The thing, however, wherein lies the rub, is the estate wasn't worth that at the time of his death. However, it's ballooned into that value now because public opinion, the court of public opinion, had Michael Jackson's value pretty low while in his last years. However, after his death, it increased, quite a bit. So the issue, from what I understand, is that, BG, formerly known as Blanket, is at odds with his grandmother for legal fees. Legal fees anywhere from $800 to $1,400 an hour per attorney for about four attorneys that she's using to fight against some of the decisions made by the executors. Now, the executors of the estate that he appointed were to execute the activities that he wanted to happen in his trust after his passing, and many of those activities had to do with pretty much all the assets in there, meaning his interests, his IP interests, his music catalog, and other assets. Now, the music catalog is what jumped up the most, and that and his name, image, and likeness, and that jumped up to Sony wanting to purchase half of his music catalog for $750,000, which then valued the music catalog around 1.5 billion. You were about to say something, Terrence?
I was just going to say 750 million, but you got
Oh, thank you. Yeah, $750 million, which would put the total value of about 1.5 billion. And then also there was some disputes about the value of his name, image, and likeness, which, is kind of crazy to me, but they were saying his estate said that his name, image, and likeness at the time of his death or the day after his death was $2,105. And we're talking about the man that would make grown men faint, grown men, and or grown people. Anybody can faint,
it.
all right? So, but the thing is that the IRS came back and said no, they believed it was worth $161 million. So now it took quite some time. His uh, trust or his estate has been in probate. So that's pretty much the thing that we're going to be talking about. First of all, he had a huge estate. He also had a trust. So why in the world did he go through probate? Terrence, I
Yeah,
thought probate meant that you didn't have, or that a trust meant that you didn't have to go through probate. So,
normally,
so yeah. So the thing is, we want to talk about that. How in the world
yeah.
is his estate going through probate? We want to talk about what's going on from a tax perspective with the IRS stating that he owes $700 million in taxes, with 200 million of that being in penalties. And we will also want to talk about, the tug of war going on with, baby boy Blanket, formerly known as Blanket, and Miss the Honorable Mrs. Catherine Jackson, Michael Jackson's mom, and what's going on with the money. But there's one more thing I wanted to also mention that we would like to talk about is how they're receiving the money from the estate and what tax implications that's going to be. So anyways, what are your thoughts? What are your initial thoughts about all that, Terrence?
Well, well, first of all, thank you for laying that out. So we're all clear on what's happening previously with Michael Jackson's estate and what's happening currently with Michael Jackson's estate. And what I love is just the framing of the things that we're going to cover. So I would love for us to jump right into that first lesson, Big Al, because when we were doing the research for this podcast, you said a number of gems. And one of the ones that struck me the most was lesson number one. So let me take it back over to you. What's lesson number
Yeah.
one about this particular topic of Michael Jackson's
Well,
estate?
well, appreciate it. So lesson number one is that you have to fund your trust. The only reason that your estate would go through probate, even when you have a trust, is meaning that you have assets that weren't funded or the trust wasn't funded with. So, what does that mean? When you fund a trust, what that means is that you are now changing the title of the assets into the name of the trust being the owner of the trust. All right. And what we're talking about are living revocable trusts, meaning you are still in full control of this thing and still using your personal social security number. It's just the title, the name on the title of these assets, be it businesses, real estate, shares owned in other items, all being in the name of the trust. So now, if the trust is not funded, then any aspect of your estate that's not funded by the trust or not funded into the trust is going to go through probate. So lesson number one would be to fund your trust. And I'm going to go ahead and say it, Terrence. Here's the thing is that, we've had conversations and we're all in the, we all want to be transparent. And,
Yeah.
and even with our trust that we set up, we had also let time pass um, between the initial creation of the trust and the funding of the trust. And we're saying that just as a cautionary tale that thankfully nothing happened to us in between that time.
Hmm. Yeah.
However, with Michael Jackson, that wasn't the case. So that's lesson number one, Terrence, to fund the
And
trust.
Big Al, let me also do my confession on here, right? Take it again. Something like this. So I also, when we set up the trust, it took us over a year to put the business in the name of the trust and put a home in the name of the trust. And to your point, that God, nothing has happened to us. But folks, this is real. Jackson, even the great Michael Jackson. The right information, you actually even go all set up the structure properly, but then you don't carry through. It's very important. Big Al, there was another key lesson in Michael Jackson not funding the trust that I would like to pick up on here.
Please.
That is when we look at the tax bill that Michael Jackson's estate has, and the fact that the IRS claimed that he owed them 700 million. And actually, the exact amount is 702 million because it's 505 million of taxes and then 197 million of penalties. Now, let's just look at that. Like, how could that be the case? Part of the reason why that's the case is Michael Jackson had not put the assets in the trust because if the assets were in the trust, then despite the fact that the assets skyrocketed in value because we did we did some digging to just understand back in 2009 what were the numbers that were being picked about. So there was actually a judgment where a judge sided more or less with Michael Jackson's estate to say the IRS's valuation was too high, and Michael
Correct.
Jackson's estate was valued at $111 million. Yet and still, by 2021, there are reports that the estate was worth as much as $4.5 billion.
Wow.
And because of the lack of funding the trust, putting the assets in the trust, all that gain from 111 million to 4.5 billion would be subject to capital gains tax. But if all the assets had been put in the trust, right from the beginning, then the heirs, his mom, his three kids, and those charities would have benefited from the step up in basis, and the taxes on the assets would not have been 505 million. So that's like a 505 million mistake right there, right?
Yeah.
In terms
Yeah.
of taxation. Big Al, there's another angle to taxation that you brought up, which I would love for you to share, which is the kids inheriting the money based on what they're trying to do now of selling, if you will, some of the assets and then taking the money out of the trust and putting it in their name. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So the thing is a trust is a entity that protects the money that you have in it. All right. Because a trust is an entity separate from yourself, and the trust can't be sued because the trust doesn't have any activities. So now when a trust is distributing assets or an inheritance to the beneficiaries designated in the will or and the trust, then what's happening is that you're taking, in this case, tens of millions of dollars from a protected entity and transferring it, distributing it to a young individual that doesn't have any protection. You're not distributing it to an LLC or a corporation, you're distributing it to an individual. So, what I would suggest is that the each child or each person that is inheriting, whether it's the mom or the three children that's inheriting a portion of the estate, that they inherit it through another living revocable trust so that it could go from a protected entity to another protected entity. Because once people know that you have just come into tens of millions, possibly even hundreds of millions of dollars, because we're talking about a potentially $2 billion estate being inherited by just four people, um, hundreds of millions of dollars, that there's potential lawsuits and other entities that are saying that monies are owed or debts need to be paid or being called to be paid. So by putting it in one protected entity to another protected entity is much more preferable than me or anyone as an individual inheriting hundreds of millions of dollars. So that was but once again with tax planning and not just so a big key that a byline that we want to run through this thing is that it's extremely great to have the legal advice and the legal expertise and the estate planning attorney to do the estate plan with you. But it's just as important to have a tax advisor work with your estate planning attorney to ensure the financial components and not just the legalese is actually carried out. Because as a tax advisor, from an annual basis, because we're doing the tax returns and more than once a year that we should be meeting with our clients, from a tax planning perspective, we're here to make sure that hey, have has the trust been funded? Do those that are going to inherit have they have trust set up so that this money can be ported straight to them, et cetera, et cetera. So all in all, and this isn't our last point, but I just wanted to make sure that you see this byline. The funding of the trust, which was our first key lesson, that could also that lack of funding could have been exacerbated with the proper tax planning and maintenance. The second lesson of having the children receive the inheritance in a trust from the trust rather than them receiving it as an individual from the trust is also an aspect of tax planning as well, because especially if we're talking about minor children, then those minor children are probably going to be claimed on your tax return. So we're going to ask questions about how things should be handled, especially when health his health started declining. But yeah, so now that brings us to our third point, and I'll let you take that away, Terrence. What's the third point? What is because as we mentioned, the IRS said he owed $700 million in a tax bill. And I'm not sure if they had that money planned or set aside or prepared to be paid, or if a lot of the children, those that are inheriting it, are going to have to eat that cost and walk away with, a percentage of what they should have walked away with. What's your advice on that?
Well, Big Al, first thing is let's just acknowledge that if you're doing estate planning and you're also making sure that you're doing the tax plan for your estate plan, you would have thought through and you must think through. Well, if my estate is going to owe taxes, how are those taxes going to be funded and paid for? And one of the strategies that we're aware of, and you can get in touch with us to get more details about this, is you can set up irrevocable trust, which then would be considered any assets you put in the irrevocable trust would be considered outside of the estate or estate plan or estate taxes purposes. So by setting up an irrevocable trust, you can find ways to fund the taxes that are likely to come from all assets you put in the irrevocable trust. Right? But again, this is an area that we have very good partnerships with tax attorneys that have structures that can help set this up in such a way that you may also, or your estate may ultimately not end up having to come out of pocket, if you will, to pay for these taxes. And Big Al, one of the things that really surprised me and made me conclude that I don't believe Michael Jackson had tax advice when it came to his estate and his estate planning was the fact that even at the value of 111 million that the judge came up with, I think back in 2009, the exclusion from estate taxes was something like 3 million or thereabouts. And
Correct.
Michael Jackson certainly was worth a lot more than 3 million. So, just for argument's sake, if we look at that 111 million, the implication there is that 108 million of that 111 million would have been subject to estate tax. So there should have been this structure that we're talking about where an irrevocable trust is set up to the money needed to pay for the taxes on the 108. And the last thing to share here, Big Al, we don't want to get too technical, but one of the assets that Michael Jackson's estate had was his documentary film, This Is It. And that was his preparation for the big concert that he was about to do right before he passed away. Apparently, the estate ended up releasing that after he passed so posthumously, and that grossed $260 million.
Wow. Wow.
In the tax code, there is income in respect the decedent or IRD. And basically, what this is a way that the IRS taxes income that someone who has passed away earns that goes to their estate. But with good tax planning, this tax that they would have owed on this 260 million could have been deducted from whatever taxes they owed on the entire estate. So again, I don't want to get too complex here, folks, but the bottom line is, as we looked at Michael Jackson's estate, it occurred to us that there's some key lessons for all of us to learn. So just to repeat and then to close, as you set up your trust, fund it immediately.
Yeah, indeed.
Secondly,
Amen.
if you are going to, yeah, exactly right. Secondly, if you are going to have any distribution from the trust to the beneficiaries, ensure that especially the beneficiaries who are individuals, so whether those are family members or just friends, anyone that you care about that you're leaving something to, structure the distributions to occur in such a way that that money goes into another entity that protects that money from predators of all forms, right? Third lesson is make sure that from an estate tax point of view, that you have set up a structure that allows for any estate tax that your estate will owe to be paid from the irrevocable trust. So thanks so much for spending this time with us. We hope you've learned something from this. And for those who want to get deeper in this, make sure you consult with a with an estate planning attorney. And for those who want more advice on the tax planning aspect of estate planning, you can get in touch with us or any qualified tax professional that you know. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can write us, Terrence at TaylorTax.ai or Big Al at TaylorTax.ai. And also check out Tax Strategy GPT and ask your questions because that's an easy way for you to get some information that may help you to ask the right questions when you get it. And then you can find on OpenAI's ChatGPT. All right, folks. Thanks a lot. Big Al, always a pleasure doing this
Right back at
podcast
you.
with you.
Cheers.